She ripped my painting off the wall in front of the entire school and said, "This isn't good enough for the exhibition. Don't embarrass me." Then she smiled at the principal like nothing happened while I stood there shaking, my face burning, my hands empty. My name is Ariel Tran, and that was the day I realized I wasn't family. I was just a burden someone had agreed to tolerate. I was 14 when my parents died in a car crash. One second I was doodling in the back seat, and the next, everything was gone. No goodbyes, no warnings. Just two cold bodies and a social worker telling me my next of kin was my mom's older sister. That's how I ended up in the spotless, Instagram-perfect house of Melinda Tran, a luxury event planner with a heart colder than the marble countertops she loved to show off. From the start, I knew I didn't fit her aesthetic. Her son, Nico, was a private school golden boy. Piano lessons, golf tournaments, charity events. Every inch of that house was a shrine to his potential. Meanwhile, I was given the guest room. No photos, no warmth, just beige everything, and a drawer of hand-me-downs labeled for Ariel. At first, I tried to be grateful. I stayed quiet, cleaned up after myself, didn't touch anything that looked expensive. I drew when no one was looking, faces, fashion designs, cities I'd never been to. It was the only thing that made sense. My parents used to say I saw the world differently. Melinda, though, just called it scribbling. "Don't waste paper," she'd snap. "You're not going to make a living doodling." But I kept drawing, at night, under the covers, with a flashlight. It was the only part of me that still felt alive. Then came the school's spring arts showcase. My teacher, Mrs. Gomez, had pulled me aside and said, "Ariel, your work is stunning. I want you in the exhibition." It felt like a miracle. I spent 2 weeks preparing, hours blending colors, fine-tuning details, framing it with money I saved from tutoring jobs. It was a piece about grief and survival, called Still Here. It was the first time I'd put my heart on paper. But on the day of the show, Melinda showed up early. She was supposed to just drop me off, but when she saw the painting already hanging in the hallway, she stormed across the room like a storm in heels. "This!" she hissed, pulling it down. "This is what you've been wasting time on?" I begged her to stop, but she didn't even look at me. She turned to the principal and said, "I'm sorry, there's been a mistake. My niece is just going through a phase. This isn't suitable for the show." They believed her. She was polished, charming, convincing. I was just the quiet orphan with the sad eyes and the paint-stained backpack. I spent the rest of the night hiding behind the gym bleachers, hugging the painting to my chest. I didn't cry. I couldn't. All I felt was this burning in my ribs, like my body couldn't contain the shame. Later that week, I found out she'd thrown the painting away. When I asked her why, she didn't even blink. "Because it was ugly," she said, sipping wine in her designer robe. "And no one's ever going to pay you for this crap, Ariel. You'll never make it, so stop wasting everyone's time." Something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. Clean, sharp, like glass shifting under pressure. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my tiny desk and opened the battered laptop my dad left behind. I searched for free art programs, digital sketch tutorials, anything. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I was going to get out. Every night after that, I drew. I taught myself Adobe Illustrator on a cracked trial version. I created mock-ups, fake brand ads, even reimagined logos for real companies, just to see if I could. I didn't tell Melinda. She didn't ask. As long as I got good grades, stayed quiet, and didn't interrupt her weekly wine tastings, I was invisible. But someone noticed. It happened one afternoon when I came home early. Her office door was open, and I heard her laughing on a call. "Yeah, I sold some of the kids' old drawings online," she said. "People actually bought them. Idiots. Told you I could monetize this orphan phase." My sketchbook, the one I thought was safe in my room, gone. And that's when I saw the shipping labels on the counter. My name, my work, her profit. I wasn't just invisible anymore. I was exploited. And that's when I decided, if she wanted to sell my art, fine. But one day, I'd buy her entire life out from under her, and she'd never see it coming. After I found out my aunt had sold my sketchbook behind my back, I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I just stood there, staring at those shipping labels with my name on them, taped neatly next to her coffee mug like they meant nothing. She called it an orphan phase. That was the part that stuck with me. Not the theft, not the lies, but that word, orphan, like it was a brand she could slap on and sell for profit, like my pain was a trend she could cash in on. I went straight to my room, locked the door, and backed up every digital drawing I had onto a USB drive. I didn't feel safe anymore. My sketches weren't mine in this house. My dreams weren't mine. I was just a responsibility she hadn't figured out how to write off yet. The next day at school, I skipped lunch and went to the library. I printed out every screenshot of her Etsy page, every listing that used my work. She hadn't even changed the signatures. They still said AT in the corner. I showed it all to Mr. Kellen, my old art teacher. He was the only adult who ever really looked at me like I existed. He stared at the printouts, then at me, and I swear, his whole face changed. "Did you give her permission to sell these?" I shook my head. I couldn't speak. I felt like if I opened my mouth, the dam would break. He didn't lecture me. He didn't ask why I hadn't told anyone sooner. He just nodded slowly and said, "Okay. Then we're going to do something about it." That's when everything started to shift. He introduced me to a free digital design mentorship program run by a nonprofit downtown. The catch? It was every Saturday. Melinda didn't allow weekend distractions unless it was tutoring for something academic, so I lied. Told her I'd joined a math study group. She didn't even question it. Just tossed me a granola bar and said, "Don't be late. Nico has piano at 3 and I need you to iron his uniform." So every Saturday, I boarded the bus at 7 a.m., rode 45 minutes across town, and stepped into a world where my ideas weren't laughed at. I learned Photoshop, logo theory, typography. They let us borrow tablets. They taught us how to build a brand, pitch a concept, even register copyrights. For the first time in years, I felt powerful. But nothing prepared me for what happened 3 months later. I came home one night after class to find my room completely torn apart. Desk drawers yanked open. My closet half empty. Sketches crumpled on the floor. My USB drive gone. Melinda was sitting on my bed, arms crossed, holding my portfolio folder like it was evidence in a trial. "Where did you get these?" she snapped. I froze. "Get what?" She held up a mock-up I'd been working on for a fake cosmetics brand. I'd used it for my workshop final. It had color theory notes, logo drafts, mood boards, all handwritten. "This is not schoolwork," she said. "This is design. And don't lie. I saw your name in some youth feature online, something about up-and-coming creatives. Is this what you've been doing, behind my back?" She wasn't proud. She was furious. Because it wasn't her idea. Because I hadn't asked for her help. Because I was doing something she couldn't control. And that terrified her. I tried to explain, but she cut me off. "You're living under my roof, using my Wi-Fi, eating my food. If you're going to keep doing this art fantasy, then I own a part of it. Understand?" My jaw locked. Number, you don't. Wrong answer. The next morning, I woke up to find my laptop missing, my art bag gone, my bus pass cut in half and tossed into the trash. She stood in the kitchen, sipping coffee. "You're grounded. No more programs. No more drawing. Focus on school or get out." I didn't cry. I just picked up my backpack, walked out the door, and went straight to Mr. Kellen's studio. I told him everything. He didn't hesitate. "We'll find you another way," he said. "You don't have to go back there." He made a few calls, and that's when it happened. 1 week later, I sat across from a rep from Westbridge Academy of Visual Arts, the top creative prep school in the state. They'd seen my youth portfolio feature. They wanted to offer me a full scholarship. There was just one condition. I had to submit a complete portfolio, originals only, and I didn't have them. because Melinda had stolen or destroyed almost everything I'd made. I had 1 week, one chance, one shot to prove I was worth something more than the label she put on me. I had 1 week to rebuild an entire art portfolio from scratch. 1 week to prove that I wasn't just some kid with a fantasy, like Melinda called it. I barely slept. I worked in the back corner of Mr. Kellen's studio every afternoon after school and all weekend. I sketched until my fingers cramped. I used borrowed supplies, scanned everything at the library, and built each page like my life depended on it. Because it did. Melinda didn't know about the scholarship. She didn't care why I wasn't home. She just assumed I'd given up. Every now and then, I'd get a text that said things like, "Hope you're thinking clearly now," or, "Nico's recital is tomorrow. I expect you to be there." I ignored all of them. On the 7th day, I zipped up my new portfolio and slipped it into a borrowed leather case. Mr. Kellen drove me to the interview himself. I sat in front of a panel of directors, my palms sweating through my sleeves, and told them the truth, not just about the art, but about where it came from. Not a single one of them looked away. A week later, the letter came. Accepted. Full scholarship. Housing included. I stared at the words so long, they blurred. I didn't run home. I didn't shout. I just printed out the letter, folded it neatly, and slid it into the inside pocket of my coat. Because I wasn't going back to that house, not really. But I had one thing left to do. The night before I moved into the dorms, I walked into Melinda's kitchen with my backpack and a calm smile. She was sitting at the counter with a glass of wine, wearing her usual silk robe, scrolling through Pinterest ideas for Nico's future brand. When she saw me, she didn't even look surprised. "Well, look who crawled back," she said. "Did your little hobby crash and burn already?" I sat across from her, slowly pulling the acceptance letter from my coat. She squinted at the logo. Her smile started to falter. "Westbridge?" she said. "Wait, that's that fancy art school, isn't it?" I nodded. "They offered me a full ride. I move in tomorrow." She blinked. Twice. Then, just like that, she laughed. "You think this changes anything? That's a temporary win, Ariel. Don't come crying when you're broke and irrelevant at 25. This whole thing, it's a phase. You'll be back." I stood up. "Number, I won't." That was the last time I spoke to her for 3 years. Until the day she called me in tears. I was 20, finishing my junior year, already freelancing with a boutique branding agency and featured in 3 national campaigns. My name wasn't huge, but it was known in the right circles. Melinda didn't know any of that, but she knew her world was falling apart. She'd made a series of bad investments, put her savings into a luxury home flipping project that collapsed during a market crash. Her house, the one I had to iron Nico's clothes in, the one where my art got tossed in the trash, was going into foreclosure. She wanted to catch up, she said. She asked if we could talk. I didn't reply, but I did take a little detour on my way home for winter break. I pulled up to a gated community in a rental car, buzzed the code, and met with the real estate agent handling the foreclosure sale. She didn't know who I was, until she handed me the file and saw the name on the ID. "You're Melinda Tran's niece?" she asked. I smiled. "Not anymore." I bought that house. With money I made from the very art she said was worthless. I had no plans to live in it. But I did have plans for what came next. A few weeks later, Melinda called again, this time from a motel. She was desperate. Nico had moved out. The bills were piling up. She didn't know where to go. She still didn't know what I had done. So I told her to meet me at the house one final time. I said I had something to show her. She showed up wearing a blazer, pretending everything was fine, like we were old friends reconnecting. I handed her a folder with the deed to the house inside. She gasped, flipping through it. This is in your name?" I nodded. She went pale. "You bought my house?" Then I smiled and dropped the final bomb. "No, Aunt Melinda, I bought your house, and I'm turning it into a free art center for kids like me. Kids you'd never let in the front door." She froze. and I walked away. Comment the number 1 if you want to see what happened when she tried to sue me, and how it backfired harder than she ever imagined. The first day Melinda drove by and saw the construction sign out front, she thought it was a joke. Creative Roots, free art education for underserved youth. Her old mansion, her backyard garden, her marble foyer that she once told me not to smudge with dirty shoes. Now it belonged to me, and it was being gutted, transformed into a sanctuary for the very kids she used to look down on. She called me 5 times that week, left voicemails filled with fake kindness, slipping between guilt trips and veiled threats. I don't understand why you're doing this, Ariel. We're still family. Don't you think this is a little extreme? You're humiliating me. Nico's friends saw the sign. I didn't respond, because revenge, real revenge, doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence, with the steady, deliberate erosion of everything they built on your pain. But she didn't stay silent for long. The following week, I got served. Melinda filed a lawsuit claiming I used unlawfully obtained funds to purchase the house, that I emotionally manipulated her and was exploiting the family name to boost my own brand. The irony nearly knocked me out. Her lawyer tried to demand a cease and desist on the community center's name, said it was too personally targeted, said it caused Melinda public embarrassment and financial harm. She called my success defamation. I should have been panicking. Instead, I printed out every email, every receipt, every message she ever left. I gathered old school records, scholarship documents, and every saved chat with Mr. Kellen. I even pulled screenshots of her Etsy page. Yes, the one where she sold my childhood art without consent. My lawyer barely had to speak. The judge looked through the file, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Miss Tran, are you aware that everything you've accused your niece of doing, you actually did yourself?" Melinda turned bright red. She tried to argue, to cry, to blame stress, grief, even unresolved family trauma. But it didn't work. Not this time. The case was dismissed in less than 20 minutes. But I wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, during the grand opening of Creative Roots, I invited the local news, some nonprofit leaders, and my old mentors. The story aired that evening. Former Foster Teen Builds Art Center in Childhood Home. My name trended online for 2 straight days. And then something unexpected happened. I got a call from a man named Marcel Davis, the director of a national art education foundation. He'd seen the news and wanted to visit, said he was considering grants for grassroots organizations that made real impact. He toured the space, asked about our goals, studied the kids' work displayed on the walls. Then he turned to me and said, "We'd like to offer Creative Roots a 5-year funding partnership, fully covered, with one condition." I blinked. "What condition?" He smiled. "You agree to become our youngest board advisor. You've built something special here. We need your voice at the table." I said yes. Obviously. And just like that, Melinda's former estate became a flagship for the very cause she tried to erase from my life. But that's not the twist. This is. A month later, I received a certified letter from the county clerk. Melinda had filed for bankruptcy. As part of her claim, she'd listed several personal assets for evaluation, including jewelry, designer furniture, and a certain art portfolio she claimed had significant resale value. Yes, she tried to claim ownership of my original childhood drawings, the same ones she sold without my consent, the same ones I thought were gone forever. So I filed a motion. We met in court one last time. This time, I brought something she didn't expect, proof that some of the original sketches had never been delivered to the buyers. The sales were marked as lost in transit, refunded, but not destroyed. I still had the originals. I laid them out, page by page, in front of the judge. Melinda reached for one. I pulled it back. "This," I said, "is the art you threw away, mocked, and stole. And now you want to profit off it? Again?" The judge ruled in my favor, granted me sole legal ownership of every piece of work. Melinda's bankruptcy claim was denied in part due to fraudulent asset inflation. She left the courtroom shaking. She had nothing left. No house, no business, no article. She showed up at the center on a Thursday afternoon. No warning. No call. Just Melinda, standing at the front gate of the house she once banned me from, now dressed in discount business wear, and wearing a smile so forced it looked like it hurt. One of the volunteers called me from the front desk. "There's a woman here," they said. "She says she's your aunt, and she's crying." I came downstairs slowly, and there she was. Mascara smudged, posture slouched, holding a wrinkled folder and a tote bag that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. She looked nothing like the woman who once hosted designer brunches and wore heels indoors. She looked desperate. "Ariel," she whispered when she saw me. I didn't know who else to turn to. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. She stepped closer. "I've been trying to find work. No one's hiring. The industry's changed. Everyone's gone digital, and I'm not good with that stuff. I thought, maybe you had something. I mean, you're doing amazing things here, and I could help." "Help," I repeated. She nodded eagerly. "I know events. I could plan fundraisers, organize schedules. I used to run teams, remember? I can learn. I will learn. Please." I let the silence stretch between us. She squirmed. And then, finally, I spoke. "You once told me my art would never take me anywhere, that I'd come crawling back, but I didn't. You stole from me. You humiliated me. You tried to erase me from my own story." She opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. "You don't get to rewrite the past, now that you've run out of options. You didn't want to help me when I was a kid with a sketchbook. You wanted to control me. And when that didn't work, you tried to destroy me." Tears welled in her eyes. But I wasn't moved. Not anymore. "Please," she whispered. "I just need one chance." I looked around at the building behind me. The center filled with kids laughing, painting, dreaming. The place that used to be her fortress of status. Now a sanctuary for everyone she used to look down on. I smiled. But it wasn't out of cruelty. It was out of peace. "You had your chance, Melinda. Dozens of them. And you used everyone to put me down." I stepped forward and leaned in, just enough for her to hear. "We don't hire liars. We don't hire thieves. And we definitely don't hire people who destroy children to protect their ego." She broke. Right there on the sidewalk, she collapsed onto the bench and started sobbing into her hands. People walked past. Some glanced. No one stopped. I turned and walked back inside. And for the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. Not because I won, but because I built something no one could take from me. That night, I sat in my office watching the sun set through the stained glass windows we'd installed last spring. On the wall beside me was one of my oldest sketches, the one Melinda tore down at that school exhibition. Still here, it hung in a gilded frame, right where it belonged. Because that's what survival looks like. Not screaming, not fighting, but creating a life so powerful, so full, that the people who tried to bury you have to watch you bloom. She sold my art. She mocked my dreams. She tried to erase me. Now, every time someone walks into this center and asks about the girl who built it, I get to tell them the truth. She told me I'd never make it, and I made it anyway. Without her. Comment the number 1 if you felt that twist and want more stories like this. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next revenge that hits back harder.